We begin with the group chat seen around the world after a journalist from The Atlantic was mistakenly added to a text chain with high-level Trump officials as they discussed sensitive military operations earlier this month. During a Senate intel hearing today, CIA Director John Ratcliffe and National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard, both of whom were on the text chain, claimed nothing classified was shared and repeatedly dodged as Democrats grilled them.
Were you using your private phone or a public phone for the Signal discussions?
I won't speak to this because it's under review.
Everybody in America,
so clearly,
there's nothing to
Senator,
see here is what your testimony is.
No.
You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics
So
of
you
the
refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you?
This was a huge mistake, correct? No.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also deflecting while addressing the scandal late yesterday, smearing the journalist involved. And tonight, CBS reporting that Trump special envoy Steve Witkoff was participating in the group chat while he was in Moscow. Gabbard admitting in her testimony today that she too was outside the United States. Democrats didn't hold back in their condemnation.
Sloppy, careless, incompetent behavior.
There ought to be resignation, starting with the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense.
American lives could have been lost.
This disrespect for our intelligence agencies and the personnel who work for them is entirely unacceptable. It's an embarrassment.
What a colossal screw-up.
Donald Trump initially claimed he was completely unaware of the security breach, but today he told NBC News that he would stand by NSA advisor Mike Waltz, who added the journalist to the group chat, saying he had, quote, learned a lesson. Republicans looking to dodge accountability despite spending the last decade blasting high-profile Democrats like Hillary Clinton for security lapses. That includes one of the officials at the center of this scandal, Fox News host turned defense secretary Pete Hegseth.
If there was anyone other than Hillary Clinton, they would be in jail right now. If you are using unclassified means, there is the potential for and likelihood that foreign governments are targeting those accounts. People we rely on to do dangerous and difficult things for us rely on one thing from us, that we will not reveal their identity and not be reckless with what the dangerous things they're doing for us.
Any security professional, military, government or otherwise, would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for being so reckless with this kind of information.
Irony in thy name is the Trump administration. It's worth noting that Republicans never had credible evidence that Clinton's email server was ever hacked by a foreign adversary or a journalist. Joining me now to discuss is Sabrina Singh, former Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary, and Mark Leibovich, staff writer for The Atlantic, whose editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, was a journalist involved in this explosive group chat. There's so many things here that are offensive and annoying and foolish. But Sabrina, I'm going to start with just the basics, just from a professional standpoint, right? How likely is it that nobody in this group realized that this was dangerous? That's the thing that sort of confuses me. I could understand if perhaps some of these people who are relatively new to government, like Pete Hegseth, were like, yeah, we can do this on the Signal chat, we can do it on group chat. Why was no one else in this situation aware enough to say, hey, guys, maybe this isn't such a good idea?
Well, even Pete Hegseth, I mean, you look at the comments that he made previously when he was a Fox News host. I mean, he knows, I mean, he served in the military. He knows how dangerous it is to move classified information to an unclassified text app. And so this is something that all professionals, even when you get into government, you are given a tutorial on how to handle classified information. Moving it to a classified system, an unclassified system, I mean, that is breaking the law. And I think what's really important here is that these are not just any DOD state employees. This is the entire national security apparatus on a signal thread talking about an ongoing operation while we have fighter pilots in the air. I mean, if an adversary had intercepted these text threads, they could have been killed. And that is incredibly dangerous.
And I want to add to it, it was an ongoing, like they weren't discussing the Christmas party, right? This was an ongoing operation, so people were in immediate sort of danger. That's part of what gets me. But I got to follow up with this. And then the messaging afterwards. This sort of notion of first saying, well, we didn't know, and then we kind of didn't know, and then really it's somebody else's fault. What would a responsible administration do? What is, as someone who was a press secretary, what should be happening right now?
Well, what should be happening and what would happen in any normal sense of order would be that these officials would probably be placed on leave, and there would be an immediate investigation. Or if not leave, there would be an investigation by the inspector generals of each agency and by Congress. I mean, that is the right thing to do. If this was any other, say, a DOD employee, they would be immediately placed on leave and investigated, and that is the right process. And so they should be held to the same accountability. I mean, you heard the clips right before. I think you know very well all the turmoil that we dealt with on her emails and the server. That same accountability applies to these individuals.
That would be the reasonable thing to do. Right. So Mark, I've thought of, I've done sort of multiple scenarios of this in my head. And one thing that occurred to me, and as a journalist with The Atlantic, this is what my thought was. There are people who have debated whether or not, Mr. Goldberg should have gotten on or off, or had he stayed in the chat. Some people say, hey, Bob Woodward would have stayed for years, right? We all have choices. My thought is, was there a danger to him if he had stayed on? Because given how vindictive and vicious this administrative might have been, they may have held him accountable or tried to jail or punish him for a mistake they made. Is that something that was a real concern?
I'm sure it was. I mean, I can't speak to, what Jeff was worried about or what the lawyer said and so forth. But no, I mean, we and Jeff specifically has, pretty robust history of sort of going at it with the Trump administration. Right. And he certainly has singled out our magazine and Jeff in the past. Look, I think Jeff did the entirely right thing. And I'm not just saying that because I work there or because he's my boss, but full disclosure, he is. But, he stayed on. He actually got off. He informed them he was on the chat. That was a response. He didn't have to do that. He did. I mean, I'm sure it's possible the administration could cook up some reason to go after him in some probably frivolous way. But I also think they probably don't want to draw any additional attention to this. And they also know that Jeff probably has a lot more receipts that he did not use and could, I guess, in the right circumstance. Again, I'm not privy to these discussions, but I do think that, look, I mean, there are so many levels of misconduct here, recklessness, certainly. I guess the innocent response is they were just so overwhelmed with what they were dealing with, and obviously the seriousness of the material that they weren't running checks in their own mind about whose initials are this, who is JG, what is this, and not really thinking it through. Again, you can see that happening. But at the same time, look, I mean, it's entertaining in some ways, kind of train wreck situation to follow. On the other hand, it's extremely serious, and I don't think we should lose sight of that.
It's incredibly serious, and I have reported a lot, and I've talked a lot on this show and other programs about the danger to journalists under this administration. And in a circumstance like this, where you're getting access to this information, and obviously, look, Jeff was super responsible, like he says, I'm not going to put anybody's name out there, but there was a key moment where they were discussing on this group chat people who are undercover. Right? Yeah. Individuals who were in the field, whose lives could be endangered at this particular point. What is the journalistic ethics under those circumstances? Obviously, you're not supposed to say anything, but would you not have an obligation to expose every single person in that potential chat because they're endangering national security?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously, if you are on that chat, you don't want to expose anyone who's in harm's way, certainly out in the field or any kind of operative anywhere. I mean, obviously, that's something you talk about with your higher ups, but since Jeff is the higher up, I would imagine he would never do that anyway. Look, I mean, I do think when you're in a position like this and you're in a high level and you've been cleared supposedly, extensively, you should know better, right? And you should never be putting yourself in a position where you're on a thread that is not secure, and certainly that a journalist has been invited onto and not expect to be exposed in some way. And again, I mean, you're just doing your job, and someone decided to let a journalist on. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't sympathize with that, but I also think that this is probably something that they obviously would love to have back.
I want to play some sound really quick for you, Sabrina. This is Senator Ossoff and Ratcliffe going back and forth at the hearing. Get your thoughts on the other side.
A national political reporter
you can characterize it how you want.
Was made privy to sensitive information about imminent military operations against a foreign terrorist organization.
Mistake of adding a reporter,
and that wasn't a huge mistake. That wasn't a huge mistake.
Well, I think they characterize it as
an embarrassment. There's been no apology There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error. And by the way, we will get the full transcript of this chain, and your testimony will be measured carefully against its content.
Sabrina, that comment really struck me. It's like, so you can lie to me right now, but we're going to get the receipts and we're going to expose you. What are, again, the potential consequences? What can the Senate really do? I mean, they can condemn people, but these are sort of presidential appointments. What can they potentially do as a consequence if it's discovered that many of these people testifying are lying or obfuscating?
Well, I think the problem here is also that, Democrats don't have the levers of control. So I think Democrats and Republicans who have sounded the alarm before on things like emails and other leaks should come together. This should actually be a bipartisan issue and say, look, what happened here was wrong. How do we fix this going forward? And how do we make sure this never happens again? I think also the bigger issue here is this is probably not the first time that they have set up these, Signal chats. And my question would be, Signal was not an app that is on many government phones. So I'd be curious to know if these were personal devices also being used, because you have to imagine the entire national security apparatus. Our adversaries are trying actively to intercept messages like this. This is exactly how they want to know how the United States fights, how the United States operates, and conducts their military operations. If anyone had intercepted these messages, I mean, absolutely, they put our U.S. military men and women, our men and women in uniform, at risk. And that is a huge problem. And so that absolutely needs to be investigated. Now, again, Democrats don't control the House or the Senate, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep the attention going and keep this drumbeat up.